Hi, we're back to Najdorf's 6-move sidelines, and in this video we'll be looking at a4 and g3. I chose nearly the same plan for both moves, the dragon style positions. So let's go for it. Let's start with fianchetto move g3, g6, bishop g2, bishop g7, castle and castle. Here white can choose between a4 or rook e1. Let's see what happens on rook e1. I think here you should pay attention not to play knight c6, because I really don't like the positions after knight c6, bc6 and e5. I think when rook is on e1 it's really dangerous for black if white advances e5. So rook e1. First we develop our bishop to g4, knight de2, knight c6 and h3. We're not going to retreat our bishop back, so bishop e2, rook e2. In case of knight e2, knight d7, c3. C3 is important so that white is able to develop their bishop, dark squared bishop. So rook c8, bishop g5 and knight a5. I think completely good position for black. Knight a5 of course plans to go to c4 and start counterattack on queen side. Rook e2, rook c8. This was played in Hesse-Safarli, and after a4, queen b6, not allowing the dark squared bishop to develop nicely. Rook a2, defending the b2 pawn to be able to develop the dark squared bishop. Queen d4, a very unclear position but should be totally good for black. Let's go back to castle and a4. Here I chose a very demonstrative game. I love this game very much because it shows how exactly black has to play. Knight c6, knight e2, rook b8. Black wants b5. Knight d5, b5, ab, ab and bishop g5. We of course don't want to have an ugly pawn structure, so knight goes back to d7. Queen c1 protects the pawn on b2 and rook e8. This is always very useful move, defends the pawn on e7. Rook d1, knight c5. So the point of knight c5 is that we want to develop our bishop on d7, h3, b4. I like this move very much. It gains the space on queen side. So after bishop e3, bishop d7, we can develop very nicely. Knight d4 was played in the game, and of course we don't want to exchange the knights on d4 because this knight has a very good square on e5 and on c4 also, if white allows. Of course white doesn't want to allow knight c4, so plays b3, queen c8, attacks the h3 pawn, king h2 and e6. Knight has to go back from good square, knight f4, knight c6. Now we can see that the bishop on g7 is very good and the knight is pinned on d4. So knight goes back on e2 And here black played a very strong move. Actually, I would say a brilliant move. After knight e7, it is clear that white is in huge trouble. e5 is the threat, and as knight has nowhere to go, but only on f3, the e4 pawn falls. White cannot really defend the e4 pawn comfortably, so bishop h6 was played in the game, e5, bishop g7, king g7, knight f3, and knight e4. Black is pawn up, and Tiviakov, it was Tiviakov's game against Kaupers. Tiviakov was playing black pieces. He didn't have any trouble to win this game. So I hope you love this game also as much as I do, and let's go back to our knight of starting position. a4. Well, this move, I think it's very positional move. Prevents b5, but we choose the plan with g6. Bishop e2, bishop g7, castle, castle, bishop e3, knight c6, and here white can choose between f4 to push the pawns on king's side, either to put the pieces on better squares, queen d2. Let's start with f4. And a very interesting move here, a typical idea, bishop g4. We're not losing a piece. After bishop g4, knight g4, queen g4, there is the knight hanging on d4, so knight d4, queen d1, knight c6, knight d5. Here it was the game of Aslian Petrosyan in 2006, and b5 was played. But I think that bishop b2 is much better. After rook b1, bishop g7, white takes the pawn back on b7, but black is equal after rook b8. So bishop g4, white has another option to take on c6, knight c6, bishop e2, knight e7. White is not winning a pawn because the e4 pawn is very weak and it folds eventually. So queen e7, queen e2, and rook a e8. Well, knight d4, knight d5. This is a little bit slightly better for white. So I think rook a e8 is better. Bishop d4 and knight e4. White takes on g7, king g7, and knight d5. Black's idea here is to play f5. So if white doesn't want to allow it and plays himself f5, it's not very good because black has a very good move, queen e5, activating the queen, and the idea is queen d4, king h1, and knight g3. So the queen is in double attack. So, queen e5 and knight e4. White is forced to take, and of course we don't take on e4, but we take on f5. And black is totally good. So knight d5, queen d7. Queen has to go somewhere, on d3 for example, and f5. Queen d4 is not dangerous, king g8, rook comes to e1 and queen c6 with equality. f5, rook fe1, and there was a very nice game of Ubilova against Tal. Ubilova was playing with black pieces, so h5, queen d4 and king h6. King is very safe on h6, rook a d1, queen c6, rook e2 defends the c2 pawn, and queen c5. Black exchanges the queens, so knight b6. White didn't want to exchange, and after queen c6, knight d5, queen c5, there was 3 times repetition. Let's go back to knight c6 and queen d2. We develop bishop d7, rook f d1. If f3, then we take on d4, and after bishop d4, queen a5, rook f d1. There was Kamsky Dominguez in 2013, where was king h8 played. But I don't really get the point of this move, so I think rook f c8 is much better with a fine position for black. Rook f d1, rook c8, and white has to take on c6. If white plays f3, for instance, then black plans to play knight a5 followed by knight c4. Knight c6, bishop c6. Now the e4 pawn is under attack. f3, knight d7. Knight maneuver, a5, rook e8, all useful moves, bishop d4. So white wants to exchange the dark squared bishop. In case of rook a2, black just develops with queen c7, rook c1 and e6, not to allow the knight to jump on d5. Bishop d4, queen c7, bishop g7, king g7, and knight a2. Here was a game lasting Kasimjanov in 2010, and knight f6 was played. Of course it was fine for black, but I think b5 is better. I mean, black has counterattack on queen side, so white is forced to take on b6, queen b6, and queen d4. Queen d4, rook d4, and this pawn on a6 is weak and is under attack. So we advance the pawn on a5, knight c3. It's again under attack on a5, but now we can make a use of rook standing on c-file, mysteriously attacking on c2, and we can play a4 followed by knight c5, because if white takes on a4, then bishop a4, rook da4, and rook c2 with equality. I hope you enjoyed the lines. Of course, we went briefly through these openings, but you can always find the detailed analyzed in the file. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.